Welcome to The Sentient Sky, a podcast on astrology, the cycles, and sacred intelligence.
Presented to you through a Southern Hemisphere lens by Yvonne Wildheart and Rebecca Holly.
Hello and welcome to the 9th episode of the Sentient Sky podcast. You're listening to the astrological forecast for December 2024. My name is Yvonne Wildheart.
And I am Rebecca Holly, and we'll be looking at the key transits, patterns, and energies for this December. And today is Thursday, the 5th of December, 2024.
And some of the big things that are happening this month, or already happened, is the Sagittarius new moon, Mars stationing retrograde, which is huge, Venus entering Aquarius, which will be conjunct Pluto and opposite Mars, Neptune station direct, Gemini full moon, Mercury station direct, the second Jupiter and Saturn conjunction, and Chiron stationing direct as well towards the end of the month. But before we begin, let's do our invocation, and I invite you to close your eyes, settle into your place where you're sitting and taking a deep breath as we light our candle that will hold this transmission. And as we light our candle and as we spiral from the center of our being, the void space within our very cells in our earthly body, we open up to the ever-expanding portal of galactic wisdom, knowledge, and consciousness. We call for full illumination of our unique universal map, our imprint of time and space. We call the stars, the planets, and all the spaces in between to speak through us and to us with crystalline clarity. May this transmission of galactic proportion shift us through the veils, expanding us beyond the realms of infinite creation. May we feel safe and held as we transmit this cosmic coding through our earthly vessels in the service for the greater good of all beings, as we deeply remember that we are galactic citizens, ever-evolving conduits of the cosmic matrix, fulfilling our soul's mission and our beloved Earth at this time, and so it is, and blessed be.
So it is. Thank you.
Mm.
And so, as always, all of our transits are based on Australian Eastern Daylight Time. And to discern whether or not a planetary influence or transit is going to be particularly important to you, it will be good to have a sense of what your sun sign, your moon sign, and your rising signs are.
And please note that some of this may resonate, some of it may not. We invite you just to be open and trust what you are feeling. And to remember that if you have any questions or anything that comes up during listening to the December forecast, please contact us through the Sentient Sky Patreon. That's where you'll find us. That is our home. And if you're wanting to know more or dive deeper with us, sign up, become a member. And as we're talking about members, a big shout out to our amazing members who have just journeyed with us for the last 6 months. And we just want to honor you and thank you from the deepest of our hearts. Thank you to the members of our Patreon.
Thank you so, so much. It's such a joy to see that little community growing. And so you can visit us at www.patreon.com/thesentientsky.
Yeah.
But before we jump into December, let's talk a little bit about how November was. And I know for our November episode, just because we got to about midway through November. And we're going to do a part 2, but we thought we'll just wrap it up here instead and talk a little bit about some of the things that happened there and what our experience of that was. But how has your last 3-4 weeks been, Yvonne?
Yes. So for November, it was quite a wild journey, especially, being quite heavily planet Sagittarius, and so as you, Beck, and just feeling that Mercury stationing retrograde, which was massive towards the end of the month, that's really done a number on me. But what the most significant thing was feeling that Pluto moving out of Aquarius, just I think it was like on the 20th or the 19th of November, and just feeling that moving out of my 7th house and really realizing that I've been journeying with Pluto for a really, really long time as it went through pretty much all my life as I went through, my planets in Scorpio and all my planets in Sagittarius, and then opposite my ascendant in Capricorn, and feeling that relief that now that has that journey of the underworld in really profound ways in my relationship and how I do life is now over, and this feels relieving for me actually. Yeah, having a lot of mutable signs and cardinal signs, it feels relieving. Yeah, how about you?
Yeah, I hear you. Yeah, it's been sort of hard to find like concrete examples, but a lot of what I've experienced has felt really like embodied and very palpable for me, particularly with Pluto moving into Aquarius. So for me, Capricorn is my sixth house, but it's also where my sun is. So even though my sun is very early degrees of Capricorn, it's just like literally all of a sudden there are like parts of me that feel like they're breathing deeply for the first time in what feels like forever. And I mean, like Pluto in Capricorn is like a third of my life, so it's hard to think about what it contextualize like what it was like before, but it's like there are things that I haven't been able to make sense of, that I didn't even know I couldn't make sense of, that are suddenly just starting to makes sense on a bodied level, not just a theoretical one. And I wonder if that's a bit of a sixth house thing with it, with the sixth house being related to, the body, but also our routines and our day-to-day, and how we move through life in the day-to-day. And yeah, just little things, for instance, like I've always really, really struggled to take care of myself through basic things like food and herbs. And like I've made a freaking career out of helping others with those things, but applying them to myself is so damn hard. And I've never understood why there's such a big block with that. But all of a sudden, there's a welcoming to that I can feel in my body. And my head hasn't quite caught up yet, but I can feel that there's now something magnetizing those things to me, and I am having herbs more often, and I am weaving more things into my diet and things. So that's been a really beautiful thing to notice and to experience so fully. Having said that, because we're 2 days away from the Mars retrograde station at the moment, I'm feeling the heat and the irritation in my body for sure. For me, Leo is my first house. So this is stationing retrograde in my first house of self. And again, like body and like literal appearance and like your physical manifestation in this world. And for about a week now, I have just had the most rubbish, flary, irritable sleep. Like, that sleep where you're about 70% into sleep, but you're not far enough into rest, but you're not far enough awake to really realize properly what's happening. And you can't quite, it's like this awful loop of a busy brain. And I've had that for about a week now, which is driving me mad, but I can feel the shorter fuse that I'm carrying at the moment with that frustrated Mars who loves action and movement, not being able to do that. So I'm definitely feeling my temper has a really like thin wall at the moment, and I'm having to be really mindful, and it's not so easy to stop it happening, but I'm jumping on the apology train real quick. Is kind of the way that I'm dealing with that.
This feels like a story of so many people have spoken to. Like there's something that's happened, I think, in November that maybe felt like an energetic shift or an upgrade, that we just can't really tolerate bullshit anymore. Like the bullshit rate is so switched on. And I think, maybe that's the retrograde energies or Mars doing its thing. And it's just like this energy of like anything that is not in an alignment of like this sort of a loving and caring frequency. If it's anything but that, there's a real intolerance of bullshit. I'm just like, I can't even, and maybe this is, Mercury stationing my on my actual natal Mercury in Sag and hitting all my planets there. It's just like I just can't hold bullshit anymore. I can't even make small talk. I have nothing to give to anything that's not going to fulfill my heart. Like I just can't do it anymore. And so many people I've spoken to, like within my community, we're just like, oh my God, experiencing the same thing. So if you're out there and you're listening to this and your bullshit radar is right up and your tolerance for crap is very minuscule, like welcome to the club. I think like it's a thing, and yeah, it's just a thing. I think it's a thing. It's a thing. It is a thing. I can feel it within my body. And it's interesting when we were doing the review for this meeting yesterday, and we are looking back to, this Capricorn energy and poor Capricorn, and just how much it's had to hold. And so, like anything like Sagittarius, I think probably Scorpio, Sagittarius, Capricorn have had all these major planets, outer planets go through the sign for what we were saying since 82 or 83. Like, that's most of my lifetime. We've had, Neptune and Uranus and Pluto, all move, and Saturn and Jupiter. Like we've had all of them move through those areas of your chart that have just been completely worked over, and will, and to finally come out of that and to just maybe feel some relief in those areas, especially that Capricorn area of your chart, is a thing too.
Yeah, very much so. And I think to reflect on your Mercury retrograde experience, like even though we both have a stellium in Sag, your sun is there. And
Yes.
I don't have a luminary in Sag. I've got personal and outer, like, yeah, I've got three of the seven classical planets and Uranus there. But for you, you've got your sun as well as Mars and Mercury. And so for you
Neptune,
to be
yeah.
feeling this in such an embodied, like in that Mercury communication style, that's just like, fuck no, I'm not playing this game anymore. And like for me, it's been more like reviewing old projects and like tweaking them and making sure all the headers align on all the different cards, and do they all have the same branding now? So for me, it's been a little bit more like classic Mercury retrograde, because it's my Mercury return as well, of overlooking things and just tweaking them all so that they fit properly. But I think that that's such a great anecdotal example.
Mm,
That's the difference between having a luminary experience one of these transits and another planet. It's much more embodied
yeah.
and in your face and difficult to ignore, I
Yeah,
think.
absolutely. So it being in my sixth house too of that health, and having really pushed the boundaries of how much energy I give away, and in the lead up to this Mercury retrograde throughout September and October, and really just, in a very saggy way of just, yes, we can do it all. I can do this and I can do that. And actually realizing as this Mercury was stationing retrograde, and as it's done this, my body is just like almost like eyes are popping out and I'm twitching, and just realizing how fucked my nervous system is, and my knee has done something that I can't really walk. Like it's just so clear that this Mercury retrograde in Sagittarius, on, in the luminary, but also, on natal Mercury and Mars, this whole thing about stopping and slowing down and really being mindful of body health and how much you give yourself away to service, and to pull it back and to say, well, actually, what you need to do first is to look after your own health. Like that is been the biggest and loudest thing for me in this little period of just like, just slow the fuck down, just be very bringing to a conscious, that Mercury energy of consciousness and communication, but also, movement as well. Like it's so archetypal, it's just insane. So it's really interesting when you start to really open up to the energies of astrology. This is what happens. You get very clear, loud messages of what's happening in the skies and the chart, and it's an embodiment, isn't it?
So much so. And I think too, like it's so much easier to join the dots of what needs to happen next when you have the context. Because it's one thing to be like, I've got a bung knee, shit, like, what am I going to do now? And, to be, figuring all of that out, and to be in pain and whatever else. But when you can look at a sky map and be, I can see that that's trying to slow down. So maybe if I mimic that, that will support and help this thing that I'm working on. Like it's just, and we don't always have to go gracefully into that understanding, like that's not the point, but the point is that it's available to us if we want it. And I think that it just helps us connect the dots more quickly. And an injury is such a great example of like it can be, it can help you nip that before it gets much worse, as
Mm.
opposed to trying to figure it out over longer. Anyway, now
Yeah,
I'm
it's
just
just another, it's a map that, when things happen, we can navigate it more easily because we can see it and we know that, if, when it's really clear, like, hurting the knee on a Mercury stationing retrograde and watching that go and realizing it and watching the frustration and, all the things, then you can see, this cycle, this is a part of another cycle and it will to end and things will get moving again and stuff like that. But what's the lesson that you need to learn here? What is that speaking to you? And having that, that Chiron up in, in Aries as well, and having this trine. Anyway, we're going into more things, but it's just really interesting just to have the embodied experience of what that was for me in November.
yeah.
Mm.
It's big when it hits your body like that, and you're like,
Yeah.
oh, this isn't just psychological. Like astrology was never just psychological or just conceptual. Like it literally reflects itself in matter and in our bodies, and
Yeah.
it will come through in very literal ways. Like that time I set myself on fire for Mars Uranus. Like I'm going to bring that up forever. It's the best story.
That's the best story.
Anyway,
It makes a good astrology when you're watching it happen before your eyes, and it's really it really makes it real when you know the map and you can watch the terrain unfold. Mm, very powerful. So the key themes for December, shall we move into December? I feel like we need to move on. Yep. So the key themes for December is confronting the inner and outer drama kings, sitting with inaction and frustration or the retrograde energy, rewiring the micro in preparation for action at the macro level, resourcing Capricorn with a herbal garden. Just, replanting, just thinking of that, cardinal earth. It's like, what are you going to plant now that you've had the underworld journey and everything burnt down? And for the Sagittarius areas of your chart, learning to flow with the deeper inner reviews and reflections. And it's an interesting thing for Sagittarius areas of your chart because it's so expansive and so Jupiterian, so out there that having this pinging off, and also Mars going in retrograde to really come back and to do the inner work, like the deep inner work. So that expansive that was out there is actually now internal, and it's coming back to that and sitting with that and going through that. I'm just thinking of the brain neurons and how that pathways and working that brain in a very mercurial way. But the universe looks like the same, how it all connects out there to it. And so that's the reflection of that, I guess, that quantum physics sort of element of Sagittarius. That's a very Sagittarius statement, by the way.
yes, I think that that's what it's about. It's about understanding that we can only revitalize the macro and really throw our full weight behind our expansive hopes, dreams, and prayers when the micro is really in alignment with what we're hoping for, and to kind of come in and rewire things. Let's get this first chart up because that's, I
Mm,
believe, what that is all about. So, oh no, it'll be the full moon, I think, where that is something we
mm,
bit more deeply. But our first important sky moment for December is happening on the 1st at 5:20 p.m. AEDT, and it's the new moon in Sagittarius at 9 degrees of Sag. So just in that first decan of Sagittarius.
yes. And so you can see here too that let me get my pen out. Um, yes. Mercury's just station retrograde. You can see that it's coming back at station retrograde at, I think it was 21, 22 degrees of Sagittarius, not that long before that.
22.
And so that energy is moving back into that new moon. And it's the first planet, I think. Oh no, Saturn is. Saturn is the first after the new moon. The moon moves on, and it's the first connection it has is with Saturn actually over here making a square. So the moon Saturn square not long after that new moon.
Yeah, and I think that one of the ways that we can conceptualize this cycle is to think about the full moon 6 months ago that happened in Sagittarius as being the full illumination of the previous Sagittarius lunar cycle that's been going on. And so this is a rebirthing and a new beginning for the moon's major lunations in Sagittarius. And so when I think of that Sagittarian full moon 6 months ago, where there was just so, both Venus and Jupiter were conjunct in the sky. There was so much hope and love and empathy and compassion. And so now that we've gone through the harvest of that, what do we plant here in Sag that we want to see unfold over the next 13 moon cycles through those stages of growth? I'm thinking too of, that this is a really reflective time of refining exactly what it is that we do want to propagate and seed here. And yeah, what does it mean that there's a serious Saturnian conversation as the first next port of call? It's like, I'm thinking of Sag, it's like, well, I want to do this. Like, I don't want to do it yesterday, but then Saturn is there straight away with like, but what are the boundaries? What are the structures? Do we really have all of that energy? Where do we need to conserve for the long game? And I think that with Mercury retrograding so closely nearby, that it really fits in that, like taking a moment to review so that you can refine your processes properly before flinging the arrows out into the world willy-nilly. And
Mm,
especially because the full moon in Gemini, which will come 2 weeks later, this is in preparation for that too.
mm.
It's important to be clear at that new moon phase.
Absolutely. And like, the ruling planet of this new moon is Jupiter. He's in detriment. He's the furthest away from his home sign. Like he's completely opposite and retrograde too. So that even contributes to that bunkering down and tampering that, Sagittarius exuberance of out here and doing that. It's like a real call to come in. And we'll talk more about this as that Mercury, who's the ruler of Gemini, so they're in mutual reception here, where the planets are in each other's signs, as that becomes an opposition. But yeah, that dampening of or the inward call or pull of what is otherwise a very, out there sort of new moon, especially here in oh well, Christmas, no matter where you are, so that season of celebration and coming up to that festive season, which is out there. It's a real call to come in and just really listen, which maybe feels like, as you're having work parties and school festivals and, all the things that you're called to pull out, that might be more difficult at this time because of that, that Saturnian but opposite signs of Jupiter and Mercury in their retrograde phases. And, it just feels like this coming into the inner world as opposed to being out here in a very Sagittarius way, which is tricky for Sagittarius energy. Like that's a real, you know, talking from experience, like it's been a bit of a mind fuck, to be honest.
I wonder if one of the ways that we can conceptualize that for Sagittarius is to really focus on the aligning and tensioning of the arrow. I
Mm,
think it can be really easy for Sag, especially Mercury and Sag, to be like in the vision, like to be on the horizon in the vision with everything but their bodies, already just seeing it all play out. But remembering that Sagittarius is the archer and is actually also really good at pulling that arrow and aligning it just right and looking down the line and the shaft of that, tensioning it too. Like I do think that the capacity is there when we're doing that in a really mindful way, and remembering too that Mercury is retrograding there, so that might be extra difficult at the moment, but to remember to take those breaths, and I think that makes me think too of like using the breath to determine the moment to release the arrow too.
Mm-mm.
There's a lot of internal ways of pulling our energy into a focal point, which is actually very close to us and not so far away before it then launches out into the world. And this lunation cycle is very much, I think, about those closer points of tension and holding, both this new moon in Sag and the full moon in Gemini. It really is fine-tuning the micro processes so that the loosing of the arrows and the dreams when we have the full moon in Sag 6 months from now have everything that they need to be able to go off into that big expansive dreaming.
I love that. I love the idea of the focus of a new moon, knowing that this is setting the tone for the rest of the cycle for the next, well, 4 weeks, but also the bigger cycle for the next, Sagittarius full moon come next solstice, halfway in 6 months' time, of that being really called to hone instead of that where the arrow is going, but feeling that pull to come in and manifest really focused on that before releasing the arrow bit. I just love that. That's classic. That's really, really good.
But I think that you and I are very similar in the sense that for us, the first thing that drops in is the vision on the horizon. And
Yeah.
it's pretty easy to get caught up in that. And I think that
It's so glorious. It's just so
it's
beautiful
just,
out there. It's like,
why
oh, I
wouldn't
get to
you
stay
want
out here. This just feels
to
really good.
world you want to create, right? And I think that that's part of that Mercury and Sag being in detriment there because it's
Mm.
far away from its home of Gemini, is that it needs to remind itself to take a fucking breath. Take a breath. Like if you take a breath, it doesn't matter if someone jumps in with their own story, it'll be fine, like take a breath. And to allow it to be a more bodied process. And do you know what it makes me think of too? It makes me think of really good storytellers who know how to pace themselves and to
Yes.
pace the placements of their words and the way the breath and sound can be used to really drive a good story home, but of what a holding of tension that is actually. And the way I tell a story is like, oh my God, you're never going to imagine what happened to me. And like that's not good storytelling, right? That's just me unloading on everybody. But when you're able to, yeah, I think hold the tension of
Mm.
that and allow it to move through you, that's I think a truly Sagittarian superpower. And this month, honestly, like almost half of the aspects lead back to Sag because Mercury and the Sun are just in that position to make lots of aspects with the majority of the other planets moving around just because of where they're all located in the zodiac at the moment.
Mm.
And so there's going to be a lot of coming back to whatever that Sag area of the chart is for you. And even if you don't have planets there, you'll still be getting a deep reworking of the area of the life that it represents by the house.
Mm.
Um, and also perhaps by wherever your natal Jupiter is too, with Jupiter ruling Sagittarius, what does your natal Jupiter have to input into this situation as the ruler of that area of your life?
Yes, and also for those who have prominent fire signs as well and
Mm.
mutable signs, just looking at what's coming up after this new moon is like the Mercury trine Chiron, so there's that trine here of learning something or being taught something as well of maybe that ouchness that Mercury's brought up and the like that wanting to expand but having to contract. What are you learning here? There's lessons to be learnt here. Chiron's teaching us something about the area of fire, but also, you got Mars here retrograde in Leo, about to station retrograde later this month. So, there's fire areas of your chart being activated all month.
And
You
they're like really it's all unpredictable fire that requires,
Mm.
I think, an extra level of patience, empathy, and understanding.
Yeah.
Like Mercury retrograde is tricky. It
Mm.
throws spanners in the works. And then we've got the node and Chiron in
Mm.
Aries, which is absolutely stirring up woundings
Mm.
and perhaps disbelief or questions of self
Mm.
and um, autonomy and power. And then, Mars stationing retrograde, Mars wants to go, go, go. And especially in like, bold, dramatic Leo, bold Mars doesn't want to be told that the show's not on tonight. Like, no Mars wants to hear that in Leo. And yeah, I think that the fire signs who naturally have not necessarily an erratic movement, but an intuitive, unpredictable movement, which is
Especially
part of the
Sagittarius.
predictability of them, like
Mm-mm-mm.
that's being really challenged on all fronts. And the Mars retrograde would be enough to do that alone. But then
Yes.
each of the fire signs have something that they're being asked to turn extra attention to at the moment, for sure.
Yeah. And so I'm hearing Nicole to do the Mars retrograde. But before we do that, I just wanted to speak to just a couple of other things that are happening just after this new moon. Venus trine Uranus as well, and that Capricorn. So again, Venus, this is the first time a planet has come through Capricorn in so long without Pluto there. Like that's beautiful. Mercury sextile Black Moon Lilith, Mercury opposite Jupiter. So again, that happens on the 4th. So that was for us recording here today. That was yesterday. So that again, that push pull and that inner world of really like talking to each other from that Mercury in Sagittarius and the Jupiter in Gemini being each other's signs. So there's definitely a conversation that's happening between Sagittarius and Gemini, but it's a really internal conversation. Um, Saturn, Sun squared Saturn, which happened, it's happening today, this morning. There you go. So that Sagittarius sun that wants to blaze and be out there and shine, and it moves this way and it moves that way. But again, that Saturnian element of just going, hang on, just hold it for a moment. Let's stop and slow down and let's have a bit of a look at that. Almost like feels like it might be a dampening of that Sagittarius sun a little bit. Like I feel like I'm living that experience at this point in time.
Yeah.
Of
Just
the
checking out the chart for the 4th of December when that's happening. So we can
Yes,
share the what you've just been talking about.
yeah, beautiful. Um, should we keep going? Venus
Um,
sextile Neptune, or do you want to spend some time Mercury opposite Jupiter?
I think we've probably covered that just talking about the Gemini Sag axis.
Hmm.
I think the other thing worth mentioning, you just mentioned Sun square Saturn,
Hmm.
right?
Yep.
Yeah, I think that that's an important one in terms of the bigger cycle, and I think it's just worth conceptualizing that this is like the 3/4 moon moment in
Mm,
terms of the Sun and Saturn have their nodal cycle together. And so
mm,
this is a moment of beginning to wrap up, of beginning to come into that dark half of the cycle between
mm,
Sun and Saturn, coming to the end of that, like the tail end of the harvest.
mm. And this might even be one of the last times potentially. I didn't have a look, but where the Sun in Sag and Saturn in Pisces meet like this, because I think this time next year, depending on when the retrograde is, Saturn will be close to moving into Aries.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I think that's worth looking at though.
Mm-mm.
And just thinking of what it is for the Sun and Saturn to really hold like polar opposites in the sense of the Sun being the center and the heat and the life giving, and then Saturn holding the edge and the boundary and the cold and dry. Like it's a part of the reconciling of different pulls within us, and we're in a harvest phase of what we've learned from this Sun Saturn cycle over this last almost year or so, that's coming to a close. And then when they do meet in like 3.5, 4 months from now.
Yeah, during the March, and by then actually the nodes would have shifted, and so we will have when they come together in would have been be about March, late February, March it will be. It'd be during the eclipses. So this is really interesting.
Yeah, so this feels really preparatory to
Yeah.
me as well. And I think and then we've got the Mercury Cazimi
Mm,
happening on the 6th as well at
mm,
1:17 p.m. That is actually a really great transit to lean into in
mm,
a really embodied sense. So for Australian Eastern Daylight Time at about 1:15 on the 6th, which is tomorrow for us. I think it's really worth just if you can put aside even just 15 or 20 minutes to really just close your eyes and drop into that mercurial mind, intellectual, communicative space, and perhaps to invite a prayer of cleansing and clarifying and cleaning in that mind space, because that's what that is. When what Kazemi actually means is to be in the heart of. And so when there's a Kazemi, there is a planet moving into the very heart, that fiery core of the sun. And so Mercury does this 6 times a year, which tells me a lot about how often our mind needs a defrag, right? Like 6 times a year, we should be defragging that space for sure, doing a backup, all that kind of stuff. And so this is a really potent moment to very intentionally lean in and to call in a bit of a defrag and a cleaning of the cobwebs of your mind space, and a willingness to see things more clearly and more in alignment, particularly in that Sagittarian big picture, big vision kind of way. It could be a good moment to just really call in the clarity of what comes next, I think, and especially in that very still fresh new moon space, that feels very in alignment.
And very much so, because it's happening at 14 degrees of Sagittarius, which is where the great attractor is actually, which is really interesting. There's two sort of gravitational pulls that lay in Sagittarius. One is the galactic center at around about 24 degrees, 25, 26, and the great attractor, which is 14 degrees. And the great attractor is a gravitational anomaly out way out, that is pulling thousands of galaxies, including our Milky Way galaxy, towards it. Now, our Milky Way galaxy will never reach it. I don't know. It's billions of years away. But still, having the sun and Mercury in the heart of the sun, and communicating with something so far out beyond our periphery, beyond our even imagination, right out in the galactics. There's something here too of receiving information from somewhere else that's not even our galaxy. It's way out. So it's like outer space information. So something beyond what we could even imagine. So, it feels like that, as you said, taking that time to defrag and come back into the heart, especially with that Mercury in retrograde, which is all about restoring and replenishing and, coming back into that heart space. But saying that those wishes of Sagittarius of just holding that bow here and just holding it, but knowing that it's going out to as far as that and being beamed back in from the outer space is something quite phenomenal, I think, at this time.
I
Mm.
agree. And this feels like such good, dare I say it, not being Grace, homework. This feels like really good homework for the full moon to come as well. Like if you
Mm.
get clear, that's a really potently magical moment that you could ritualize to really strongly call that in.
So just to say the date again for those who are keen to do that,
Yeah.
it's December the 6th December at 1:17 Eastern Daylight Savings Time. Mm.
Yeah, it's a potent moment of magic. And I might just mention a flower essence that
Please.
just added to my online apothecary. I've probably got about 15 or 20 essences that I've made over the course of the last 2 years, that have just been waiting for their labels to be made to come out into the world. And I recently created 7 flowers and a stone essence, which I'm slowly adding to my apothecary. But one of them is this really sweet lavender skies, which is a lunar lavender essence. And lavender is very mercurial and lunar. And this essence was, I'm actually drinking it at the moment to try and counteract some of the martial fire stuff that's going on. That it just invites in such clarity and tranquility and peace. And it really, to me, it's like often when I guide students or clients into like an inner space, I'll get them to kneel at a reflecting pool. And so to me, this lavender essence really invites you to the edge of a very, very still twilight, hazy, purple reflective pool to really have the clarity, but more importantly, the softened, not so tense space to really show up there deeply. And yeah, just already kind of talking about this Sag Gemini axis and that, you know, there's a lot of fire and tension and frustration available in the skies at the moment. I'm probably going to be guzzling more of this. And yeah, you're welcome to have a look at the online apothecary because I've only just popped it up there a couple of days ago. But it's a really, really sweet one. And lavender has always felt very feminine to me. But when I made this, it was very, very clear that a grandfather archetype was really present. And I think that it was just really focusing on that wise old mercurial aspect. I actually think of it as you know, Mercury is not so watery as such, but I think of it as being related to the King of Cups and just the capacity to hold space and to let others speak and to say very little, but things of great wisdom. And yeah, so something like that might be worth leaning into to help you really drop into and benefit from some of those spaces opening up in December.
Absolutely. And what I'm hearing is that holographic universe, you know, that reflecting pool of knowing what's within is without, and just, you know, this you know, the great attractor that is so far out, but there's something in here that's you know, pulling gravity within us as well, and then just having that, yeah, that holographic, you know, remembering that that's what we're are, like that quantum physics moment of just going, oh yeah, so what happens in here internally is also happening out there, and vice versa. Yeah.
So much so. And I think we'll pop a link in the show notes as
Yes.
well so that you can have a look at that if you like.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Okay, let's moving on to Mars stationing retrograde, the long-awaited Mars station retrograde. This is happening on the 7th of December 2024 at 10:34 a.m. Australian Eastern Daylight Savings Time. Mercury Mercury is in this area of your chart until at least April. Like it's a big journey. So it entered its shadow zone at 17 degrees Cancer on the 6th of October. So we're already in this energy deeply. It will move through and station direct mid-February, and it will move out of this area. It's like April, May, and by that stage, by May next year, by the time this retrograde has done and dusted, there's going to be a whole different landscape on the charts because we're going to have Neptune in Aries, which is humongous. We're going to have the nodes in Pisces. We're going to have we're going to have Venus stationing retrograde in Aries with Neptune and Saturn. Like it's a whole different kettle of fish. Like so, whatever Mars is doing here, it's stirring up some shit just so we can really see and sit in what we need to get ready for the big changes that are coming up in the next couple of years. And I mean humongous changes. Like all the outer planets are moving into new signs, and this feels like the real tangible beginning of that actually. Well, Pluto moving into Aquarius was one, but this feels like another one. Mm,
Absolutely. And I mean, like Mars's retrograde period is 7 months, you know, like that's a massive amount of time to be doing this deep reworking in this like what is it, like 20-degree or 25 or 30-degree area of the chart. And yeah, it really is, it's reaching its hand in so deeply to stir up and dredge out. And you know, like frustration serves to remind us what we don't want anymore.
mm,
We need to get angry to fuel change. If we don't get angry, nothing changes.
mm.
And so Mars retrograde is going to allow us to really backtrack and go back over things which Mars doesn't really enjoy. You know, Mars wants to move forward, but this is it's a fallow moment in the Mars cycle where it's not about the new projects and what you're going to achieve next. It's about what's happened and how we're going to do it better next time.
Mm.
And so those of us with notable placements with Leo and Cancer, whether it's because it's an angular house, a rising sign, or because you've got important planets or luminaries, or just lots of planets there, this is going to get a real deep reworking to help inform you of how you want to act and impose your will on the world within those areas of the life going forward. And you may not actually sense what actions need to be taken until that period is over. So don't necessarily expect during the retrograde it's going to be clear. It may not be clear until much later within that retrograde cycle. And I think that that's a really important part of the nature of a Mars retrograde, is to just strap in and go along for the ride and let it show you. And to not assume that the work is done or that you've got the answer and to rush on out of it. Because that's kind of what Mars wants to do.
Yeah. And especially
And
during these times with a changing landscape, like the landscape's going to be different by the time this is finished. So you couldn't possibly take action on things now because you're not going to know what you need to happen, what needs to happen, because it's all just going to shift.
absolutely. And I
Mm,
think Mars retrograde, because it can build frustration, that this can also be a time of saying or doing things that felt right at the time, but that don't actually fit in the bigger picture of things. So this could, and this is, like what I was saying earlier, that feeling this station coming up, that I've just been so irritable that I'm like lashing out and snapping at my poor small human more often than normal. And I can't stop myself when that's happening, but I can jump real quickly on the apology and the repair, and like, I think it's just noticing that stuff is going to flare up. You can't possibly put a lid on it, and you don't want to put a lid on Mars anyway, because he'll just find a more explosive way to come out. And we've got a Pluto opposition happening here as well. So the potential for explosive things is definitely, or stuff coming up and out from the deep is really apparent.
mm.
Um, and so it's really just moving with it and being willing to repair, either as you go or later, while you let it transform you and change you into something better.
Absolutely. And last time Mars was in retrograde in Leo was 2009, 2010, and that was when it fully in Leo. This is different this time because this is for the first time um, in a while that Mars will be retrograde in Cancer. So there's an energy shift that happens. I think it is mid-January towards late January where Mars regresses back into Cancer, and so that will bring a different element or different energy to that retrograde phase as well. So that showy sort of Mars in Leo been tampered down, it will move into Mars, reviewing the Cancer part, maybe sharpening its claws or, developing a harder shell on its back, to armor up better because it's had this wisdom of what it needs to do now when it moves back into Cancer. So that will bring a different energy as well. So wherever Leo and Cancer is in your chart, take note. Like this is a part of this process of rewiring, rejigging, preparing for what's to come in the next couple of years. And by the time Mars moves out of this retrograde, we're all going to be so different. I can already feel the difference in my cells, like just with all already the changes, but it's just going to, yeah, it's just is going to be different.
Yeah, and I think so for me, this is my first and my 12th house, which is like that's a real sensitive area of a chart to be retrograding back and over. And what I'm feeling for myself is that time that Mars is in Cancer in my 12th house, that I think it's going to bring a lot of like old tricky stuff up, and
Mm,
it's an opportunity just to meet it differently, and to sit with it, and especially with Cancer, to bring my wholehearted motherly compassion to that part of myself. And like it can't be healed if you don't look at it,
Mm.
Maybe it can, maybe that's not true. I don't know,
I
but
don't think so. You've got to see it to know what you're dealing with, to be able to work through it in the depths that's being required here.
yeah.
And just thinking to coming up in, that late February and March when we start having the eclipses in Pisces, there's going to be this Mars is going to be rubbing up against that eclipse period as well during that time. So there's going to be an exacerbation or something that's going to come to a head around late February and early March when the Pisces eclipse is going to be happening, because there'll be like a trine with this Mars in the
Mm.
water signs. Yeah.
I'm thinking of the way that you have spoken to Cancer in the past as always wanting to kind of go around things and not wanting to take things
Sideways.
front on. And, for me, Mars in Cancer, it's in its fall because Mars has its exaltation and its most lifted up place in Capricorn. And so Cancer can be a really uncomfortable place for Mars to be moving through. And I think that with that retrograde, it can be especially prickly and sore. But I think what's being asked is to not avoid,
Mm.
or actually you're being told it cannot be avoided, and the need to sit with how that feels so that you can update your shell, so that you can, like you were saying, sharpen the pincers, like reminding you why you need to be protected in the first place, reminding you why you have a fierce mama part of yourself that has to come out sometimes. And this will remind you why that's important and why it's so valuable. And I don't think it's going to spend a lot of time feeling nice, but
It's
if you want
necessary, I
to
think, as you
get it,
said, ready for the next upgrade or leveling up that's to come over the next few years. Like, this is preparation for that, and to like, we just need to see what lays underneath fully to be able to just go, okay, this is done and this is what I need now, with a new shell and new pincers or sharpened pincers, to be able to come out of that in a very Mars in Leo way when it comes out in April, of just like, here I am, brand, I'm my new self, and I'm here to show everybody who I am now after
yeah.
this great transformation. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm big, I'm bold, but I've also done the inner work.
Yeah, and that is fucking
Ready to move forward.
powerful. Like, you think of people who've done like lots and lots of inner work, who are out there showing, doing work in the world, out in the world and being out there, like in a Leo fashion. Like, that is some powerful combinations. Like, that's epic.
It really, really is. And around this same time, we have Mercury squaring Saturn,
Mm.
um, and still in that opposition with Jupiter there as well. So there is this tense aspect between how we communicate, what our boundaries and limitations are, but also what we're hoping to become and grow into. And so, like, there's a real, I think, pull for all of those things to get to be front and center and to be the priority. But in the foreground really is that Mars retrograde, which just isn't able to lend any fuel to anything because he's stopped and has slowed right down. Um,
During this time too, Venus enters Aquarius and conjunct Pluto, and as Venus moves past that point, it's going to come in opposition to this Mars retrograding, which is really interesting, because we had a bit of a chat about this last night, and this is the full illumination of that Mars and Venus conjunction, and it's in exactly the same spot in Aquarius. Like, Venus will be at, I think it's 6 degrees, 6 degrees of, um, yeah, 6 degrees of
or 60.
Aquarius, which is the same place, which we'll talk about later. I've just realized that. But yeah, this is as Venus is entering Aquarius, she's having this conversation with Pluto, and then she's going to come in this opposition with Mars later on in the month. So this was also another setup of this dynamic between that balance of this fierce feminine who's gone and had a journey through the underworld, and this Mars in Leo who is like tampering back, just going, oh, maybe I can't be so showy, or there's something here that I need to have an ego check in it all, or something like that. Mm.
Just thinking of a retrograde being another version of the underworld journey, it's
Yes.
kind of the queen of the underworld going, mate, it's time, get down here. Like I've been there, you'll be fine, get on in there. But I think just before we dive into that, because there's so much there worth
So much. This
delving
but this week's a really big week actually, in the
into.
lead up to this full moon.
And so yeah, Venus goes into Aquarius at 5:13 p.m. on the 7th, so later the afternoon on the same day that Mars stations retrograde, and then we'll conjoin Pluto immediate. Well, it's already conjoined Pluto, but that's an immediate thing. And then we'll also have Sun opposite Jupiter, but we also have Neptune stationing direct at 27 degrees of Pisces at 10:42 a.m. on the 8th of December. And we were talking about this and realized that the next time that Neptune stations retrograde, it will be in Aries. So this has actually been the last pure retrograde journey in Pisces alone. So Neptune will retrograde back into Pisces next year, but it will have already been in Aries. So the retrograde will share those two signs as opposed to a purely Piscean retrograde that is winding up on the 8th.
Yeah, it's very, very epic. And, Neptune, for me, my experience of Neptune station direct in the past in Pisces is like this shattering of illusions. And that Piscean energy in retrograde is, the fog and, things are cloudy but when it stations direct, it feels like it's something that's busted through, and all of a sudden there's like you see the matrix shattering or something quite, especially at these last degrees of Pisces, the last degrees of the zodiac. We've had this massive journey, and we spoke about this a few episodes back. This Pisces moving into Aries, this is a generational transit, like it's 160 something year transit. So whatever's happening now as the stations direct, this is a part of that great generational intergenerational prayer of, okay, now can we shatter the illusions and the bullshit, which sort of matches that Mercury and retrograde and Sag and Mars. It's like, cut the bullshit out, it's time to really look at some stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's and yeah, don't be surprised if you feel just a little bit discombobulated or a bit
Mm,
spacey that day. Yeah, and you may not notice it at all because it is one of those bigger outer planets. But
mm.
if you do have a sensitivity to Neptune or a strongly aspected Neptune in your own chart, that might be something that you feel in a really embodied way.
Yeah, and especially those of our generation, sort of, those who are sort of late 30s, and 40s that have Neptune in Sagittarius, which is where Mercury is retrograding as well, that might add another element to this stationing direct as well.
Yeah, for sure. Just before we jump into the Venus-Mars opposition, and I think this is a nice platform into that, is
Mm,
I just want to take a little moment to talk about what it's meant for Venus to be moving through Capricorn over this last few weeks. So
yes.
even though that's a bit of a hindsight thing, it's really connected to the Pluto story. And it's connected to the re-resourcing of Capricorn. And so I think we mentioned this earlier, but
Mm,
in the last 40 years, 30 of those years has seen Capricorn with either or at the same time Uranus, Neptune, or Pluto transiting through Capricorn. So I'm not quite 40 yet, but in my entire life, only 10 years has seen Capricorn not have one of those hard-hitting, change initiating, deeply transformative, moving planets in that space. And it's probably similar for Sag and Scorpio as
mm,
well. But because Pluto spends a different amount of time in different signs. So Pluto is at its fastest in Scorpio. It's only there for 8 years, whereas in Aquarius, it's there for 20. So it's and in Capricorn, it's like 16 or 17
mm,
years or something like that. And so it is an absolute work of mastery and beauty and magic that when Pluto exited, Venus entered. Venus was the first one to step out into the landscape of cardinal Earth and Capricorn. and drop the seeds along her way. I'm kind of picturing it as like, you know, one of those Disney princesses with the long dresses and like the flowers that spring up with every step. It is just such an inviting in of healing
Mm.
and beauty, and remembering the beauty of what Capricorn has at its heart when it's not undergoing a deep confrontation and reworking of its principles, because Capricorn is all about the big picture. It's all about everybody being resource. Like, what structures do we build for everybody to be well? Like, where Cancer is the mother taking care of their family and the literal breast milk that goes into the individual that they hold. Capricorn is, yeah, it's the house around them, you know, it's the people in the community who go and get the things and bring them back so the mothers can nourish the individuals as they need to. And just to imagine what it means for, frankly, like patriarchal Capricorn to have Venus saunter through and offer her herbs. And I'm thinking of things like the feathery corianders and the roses and like all those really beautiful plants in a place that has had great strife in the last 16 years, and even just thinking of 2020 and
Mm. Yeah.
all of the big stuff that's happened there.
Mm.
Just want to bring our attention to the enormous breadth that the Capricorn areas of our chart get now, and that we get for like 50 years, you know, like this is a solid 40 or 50 years before Uranus enters back into Capricorn, and Neptune and Pluto will follow many, many years after that. And so we'll see the return of difficulty and challenge for sure, but not on that same outside of human normal reality kind of change. And whether you've got a luminary or a number of planets, or whether it's an angular house, my invitation to you is to just really deeply receive the beauty of that, and to know, like, even if you're listening to this after it's happened, the seeds have been sown. You can still lean into that. And to maybe take some time doing that in your life as well.
Yeah, it feels so sweet. Yeah, for those who've got cardinals in their chart, like it's just like, oh, great. I've been loving the memes of Pluto moving out of Capricorn, the memes of like this sort of celebration of like, oh, thank goodness. But it goes beyond this Pluto transit. And as you said, this has been going on for a really long time, and some of us our whole life. Like this is significant moment, and yeah, that beautiful Venus coming in. It's just such a balm. And then the sun will follow at solstice in a couple of weeks, and Mercury will too after its retrograde. It just feels like that, you know, we're starting to breathe some life back into Capricorn, and just like some sunshine and light, and yeah, just fun back into Capricorn. Because as you said, you know, Capricorn's like the party with the Sagittarius, like, you know, like they're out there, they're a community minded, the transpersonal planets. Like, yeah, we can see this and let's do this and let's plant these seeds and let's celebrate life and, you know, life force energy, you know, with the structures on the down below. And, you know, there's new seeds. It's like this enthusiasm, the potential that is here. But for the collective, like it's time to feel that again and really just ravish in it, I think.
Yes, like how do we get survival right so we can play well?
Yes.
Like, it makes me think of the Six of Cups. Like, if you look at the tarot card, the Six of Cups from the
Mm.
Smith Rider-Waite, where it has the two children exchanging the cup of beautiful blooming white flowers. And you don't tend to notice unless you look really closely, but in the distance, they're like in a town square or something. In the distance, there's a soldier patrolling the town square. The reason they get to hold their innocence and their play is because they're protected and they don't have to worry about what's going on. They're held. And it's the same with our nervous systems and our stress response.
Mhm.
But it's also the same in our day-to-day lives. If we're struggling to make ends meet and don't have quite enough for the groceries, and how do we meet the play in our life? It can
Mm.
be hard to put all that, and sometimes, frankly, just not possible to you can't just put it down, and Capricorn's really good at making sure everything is in place so that everyone can just let go and enjoy, but they're very serious about getting that stuff right first so that you can truly let that go and not just create a bigger problem for yourself later because you didn't have the foundation in place. So, yeah, having Venus bringing her sense of harmony and beauty and good relations feels so, so important for a sign that when in its shadow can become very hierarchical and very cold and separate from the heart of what it's actually doing it for. Capricorn has to hold the heart of the why and the purpose, or else it can lose sight of what it's doing it for and just build for building's sake. And Venus is going to remind us of that purpose.
Absolutely. And I also think too that this might be a time when you realize just how fucked your nervous system has been over the last how many years. Like when it's like, it's when we start to, relax and sink in and become still after the whole unraveling that we actually get to really start to feel what that was. And so you might even feel like when you start to feel that you're feeling safe enough to just stop for that moment and it's like, okay, everything's okay here, the house is not on fire anymore, like we can just stop. And that's when you start to feel, fuck, I've been running on adrenaline for the last 20 years, like, so to really honor that earthly body of yours in this time and to really listen to it. And again, with the retrograde energies here, that's going to help this. But that this is also a part of the story of being able to come back into that, earth body and just feel it for what that was. And I think this is going to also influence that Mars retrograde energy as well, especially when it moves back into Cancer, just realizing, wow, that was really like a massive fucking transformational process, but fuck, that was hard, you know?
Yeah, very
Mm,
much so.
mm.
Can we take a little break before we move on to our next chart and come back?
Sure. Just a sec. I'll just clear all the drawings.
Be right back.
Okay.
So
Mm.
now we're going to move on to the Venus opposite Mars moment on the 12th of December, 9:46 p.m. And so you can see Venus at 5 degrees of Aquarius opposing Mars at 5 degrees of Leo. And so the energy of an opposition, it's interesting because like it is there is tension there because they're holding the opposite ends of an extreme. Like if we think of Leo as being the hearth fire and the individual, and Aquarius as being the collective and the multitude of stars that makes up an entire sky. But at the same time, they hold commonalities in that it's about shining bright and it's about how you tend your light and how you tend your fires. But at the same time, there's a tension of wanting to do it their own way. And so, an aspect that has an opposition, and especially with Venus and Mars that are already wanting to do things in different ways and they have different priorities, there can be, Venus in Aquarius is like, no, we need to bring harmony to the collective, and Mars in Leo retrograding is like, I have shit to sort out over here. I don't have time for the collective. And they're both sort of figuring out how to relate with that tension. But at the same time, it's also the equivalent of a full moon moment in which everything is being fully illuminated and it's all out on the table. And, when you sit across from someone, it's a moment of deeply seeing and meeting them and having the full eye contact in your hearts, like facing each other is very different to having the person you're sitting next to having a conversation with them. And while you might be on the same side of things, it's a different way of relating when you're sitting on either side of the table. And so this is a moment in which Mars and Venus are on as far away from each other as they can get, but they're having an important conversation about what they need and what they see in the other.
Absolutely. And it's really interesting with Venus just still, having this conversation with Pluto here. So she's had a mini underworld experience with that conjunction with Pluto not that long beforehand. And Mars is in retrograde. And so there's something here about this Venus sort of having, coming from the underworld fresh from being stripped bare, like, and this Mars is like going, oh, I got to pull back and I got to, rethink about what this Leo is all about and how I take action on it. So I feel like Venus is in a stronger position here, looking back to that Mars, just going, well, you can't really do that shit anymore. Like, what the actual fuck? And this is a review from what, as we sort of mentioned earlier, with this Mars and Venus, who conjunct actually at 6 degrees of Aquarius on the 22nd, the 21st, and the 22nd of February 2024. So earlier this year. So this is a full illumination of what even was starting to happen then, or what was sort of brought up to you at that point. And now it's like this full illumination of that, but it's different because of that Mars in retrograde energy. But Pluto was in this position. I feel like Pluto was here at the same time and back in February. It's really interesting to have this review process.
It
Yeah.
really is. And, I'm saying this is like Queen of the Underworld versus cranky drama king kind of energy going on, where particularly because Venus is separating from the conjunction with Pluto, it's like she's emerging out of that underworld with the fresh wisdom of how she wants to proceed from here. And I think that when something is really fresh like that, we can be unwilling to bend too far, like we kind of see really clearly and know what we need to do. She's in her own decan in Aquarius here as well. So she's got a little bit of extra resources and support there. And Mars is yeah, very much, yeah, in retrograde, moving very, very slowly, which it doesn't like or appreciate. And so it does feel like Venus has the upper hand here in terms of their combined vision of what happens next.
It really, and also with that Mars in the Saturnian decan of Leo, which is also, that sign of Aquarius, ruling planet. So this is really interesting that, this feminine who's just had, coming out and looking at things with the new lens of the underworld, just saying you can't do that shit anymore, Mars. Like, you just can't do it. And as I'm talking, for me, I'm hearing that with him. I got Leo in my second house and Aquarius in my eighth house. As this chart is, this is really interesting, and just feeling that push pull about my own resources and not being able to do that at the moment because, I'm just so exhausted, and really trusting that shared resources will come into play. And this is what happens with Venus, who goes to the unknown. It's very like Anana's journey. She learns to trust the unseen. She learns to trust the void. And so this play out between, personal resources for me in the second house of just going, it's okay to rest and come back to that, and re-looking at the program of individual resources versus the, the quantum field of, resources in Aquarius and the shared, and really seeing that. It's like, well, what actually am I putting out there, with old programming of how I do action in the second or in Leo versus that sort of quantum element of Aquarius.
Yeah, and I think that for another whole layer on this, I think that if you ever want to get a little bit more specific or mundane about what might come through with an aspect like this, is to look at the tarot relationships of those decans. And so the first decan of Leo is the Five of Wands, which is a card of miscommunication, of misunderstanding, of everyone trying to do it its own way and yelling over the top of each other. And if you look at the Smith Rider-Waite version, it shows five people with the wands and they're all kind of flailing them, like no one's hitting each other. Like it's not necessarily violent, but also no one is working together. And a beautiful friend of mine who I love so much, Sun, says, oh, they're not fighting, they're just trying to put up a tent. And they've all got a different tent pole, and it's like, no, this is the center pole, no, this is the one. And that can be a really Leo problem of like, no, I know. No, I've got the center pole, that's not the, how can you have the center pole? I have the most important pole. Now we're getting really phallic, see. And so, Mars is in this five wands communicative conflict position. And if we look over to where Venus is in Aquarius, it's the Five of Swords, which is a card of being bowed low. And that's very much what she's done visiting Pluto here, is to bow low, to admit defeat, and to proceed accordingly. But
Mm,
to be able to let something go so deeply, like the Five of Swords, while it can have grief, it is such an ask to put down your frustration, to put down the fight. There is no fighting anymore, actually. And to be able to release and let go and walk away. Oh, beautiful. So here's the Five of Wands, where they're all just trying to put up a tent, that they're not working together. Everyone has the best way of how to do that. And yeah, the Five of Swords shows the man kind of smugly walking away, collecting all the swords off the beach, and then the other two figures downcast and walking away. But it's interesting to see these two different versions of these fives that are doing conflict differently, where Mars is getting frustrated and going, no, I know. Venus is bowed low and going, actually, it's about relinquishing. And here's the Five of Swords,
mm,
and the folk walking away from a lost battle.
mm.
I think that there's such wisdom in both of those things. Like, I think the Five of Wands can actually bring great laughter and humor too, when everyone realizes that they're just misunderstanding each other, but everyone was so upset. Like, there is a capacity to really turn that Leo drama around and be like, aren't we all silly geese? Like, we really got caught up in that for a moment there, didn't we? Like, there is an opportunity to have that become something that drives connection and joy, when we can admit, yeah, we didn't do that very well, did we? And then on the Venus side, we're learning that sometimes walking away from something is actually the most empowering thing we can do, because we can't take our power back from another who is not willing to give it. We have to reclaim that within ourselves and realize it's not about the other at all. And so I wonder, depending on where this shows up in your own chart, if there will be a pull to kind of fight for a thing or relinquish it. And perhaps you'll have to move through what the answer is there. And perhaps it's a little bit of both
Yeah.
as well.
And that could becomes in a format of thoughts and beliefs as well. Like, it doesn't always have to be like a negative thing that, they have to give up a positive thing to bow into a negative thing. It's like that. Maybe you're letting go of really, or surrendering to an old pattern belief that's outdated. Like,
Yeah.
especially with Venus having just gone through the underworld, like she learns that of the things that she can't take with her. So, to look at that from that perspective as well.
Yeah, I think like there's such an important nuance there of the point is that something has to be released, and that it feels like a loss. What you're releasing it doesn't matter whether it's good or bad. It could be anywhere on that
Yeah.
spectrum. But the point is that it is bringing as much grace and personal power to a letting go, even if what you're letting go of is something that is like so clear that it's the right thing to do. There still is that process of separating and then reclaiming and coming back to the heart of something again.
And it's really interesting, not that like within 24 hours of that, Venus has this sextile of with Mercury, this new information that's coming through, like this by doing that, something new comes through with the wisdom. And Mercury is almost about the station direct. It's had this big journey that is starting to share its wisdom, but it's new to Venus here in between the that Sagittarius part of your chart and the Aquarius part of the chart. So even though it's been called to let go of something, there's something new coming in quite closely afterwards, like not long after that. So to take, if it's something that you're being called to let go of, that's quite significant to know that it's going to be backed up quite quickly.
I love that. And seeing that Mars is also trining Mercury there. So both Mars and Venus
Mm.
have a platform for communication and have something that they want to say, and they have the outlet being the Mercury retrograde in Sagittarius. And it might begin because the trine tends to be a more robust or supportive aspect than the sextile. It could be that it begins by Mars having the louder voice,
Mm,
but they're separating
mm,
those. I don't know that they are applying at the moment.
yeah.
But then Venus coming into the sextile gently after that kind of feels like that the quieter voice of reason that comes in and inspires after that.
Mm, beautiful.
Shall we do the next one?
Yeah, absolutely.
Oh,
So
love.
Gemini full moon. So
Hmm.
this Gemini full moon is happening at 23 degrees and 52 minutes on the 15th of December at 8:01 p.m. Australian Eastern Daylight Savings Time.
Yes, and it is a separating conjunction with Jupiter for the moon there, but it is still a conjunction with Jupiter nonetheless, and an important one because Jupiter is ruling the sun's end of this full moon in Sagittarius. And then again, like we have this mutual reception between Jupiter and Mercury happening at a time that the lunation, like the new moon, full moon, is happening in those signs is quite a potent magic, I think.
Mm,
Um, and at the same time, there is that square forming with Neptune there as well at
mm.
27 degrees of Pisces, which is creating a hard aspect and is communicating to both the sun and the moon at this time as well.
Yeah. And so now that this Neptune is now moving direct as well, this might be when we get to see a full illumination of those earth-shattering, illusions that sort of bounded us over the last however long. And just like that, just it feels like a jolt of seeing something else under the full illumination. And I do love the fact that as this moon is rising, like if you go out to the eastern horizon on the 15th of December, you're going to see this beautiful full moon rising up in the east, like at the same time. I think that's so sweet for this land. It's really nice. I like that.
And with Jupiter rising at the same time,
Yes.
quite potent for that time zone area to be right on the ascendant like that is really it just feels a bit magnified.
Mm,
And I think here, like we sort of touched on this already, but this is really enlivening the micro,
mm,
enlivening all the little synapses that are always firing off and sending data backwards and forwards. And this is really bringing that into full illumination. And with Jupiter there too, it's bringing wisdom along with it, and the wisdom of stepping back to look at all those little things that make up the greater whole. And
mm,
so there's a real opportunity here to bring your attention to what may want to be rewired in service of deeper wisdom. But I think, and with Neptune there too, I think it's really interesting of like, yeah, where does data or information or our intuition help us pierce through veils or mists of Neptune?
mm,
But this also feels like a potentially quite playful, dreamy full moon, where and yeah, like where they could also like Gemini is just so curious and loves the back and forth of banter and to be amongst friends and to be having a good time and just feeling that this also opens up that dreamy curiosity of like, what else could that be? And giving ourselves permission to follow the data to see what other rabbit holes we could fall into. It feels like a YouTube hole, like you start learning about one thing and then all the recommendations come up and you open up all these new pathways, which is a very Gemini kind of thing.
I was just, when you were saying that, I could just imagine like signposts and which way you're going. You're sort of just following the signpost, not really knowing where it's all going. But, as our teacher, Jane Hardwick Collins, would say, follow the signs, they show you the way. So even if you're not quite sure where it's all going, that greater trust of just like, it's okay, just follow it. Does it feel good? Yes, let's go that way. Does it feel good? Yes, let's go that way, and just following your heart space of just following the signs of and trusting where it's going to take you, even if you don't know where it's going. That listening to that very moon intuition of the mind and heart element here, I think too, of just movement.
Yeah,
Mm,
I love that like to lean into the unknown with curiosity and joy.
yes.
It feels like such a wonderful Gemini gift. And I think that Jupiter really like handholds that really beautifully here with this conjunction. And I think that if things start feeling a bit strange or you're not sure, you might have just wandered a little bit into that hard aspect with Neptune. Come back to the curious joy and the data of what you know is true, and then the data of how your body tells you what it knows is true, and trusting that literal data and that the senses of your intuitive body.
What I'm
um
feeling and what my picture is just seeing that inner child, which is very Gemini children of playing and just giggling and just skipping off into the distance in the field and not really knowing. They're just in the moment of like, la da da, following the flower, that moment. But yeah, and yeah, I'm just hearing you say too, just like when it starts to feel a bit, hardened, um, yeah, maybe going, yeah, they come back to that thing because we've also got forming, and we'll talk more about this in a minute, is this second Saturn and Jupiter square as well. So that might be starting to influencing that moment.
Yes,
Mm.
yeah, true. And I love the image of the children, and it's kind of like allow the metaphor of your child self or the children you're running and giggling with to run past the darkened forest with the will-o'-the-wisps. Like that's the Pisces stuff, and perhaps Neptune is misting something deeper and darker and Baba Yaga-ish in the forest. But like, is this the moment for this? I think that there's that invitation of like, I can follow the will of the wisps into the Saturn archetype in the forest of Pisces if I want to, but the full moon is really bringing our embodiment and our attention to the joy. Maybe it's also a beautiful moment to like put some of those boundaries and conventions and structures and, like the exploration for the sake of transcendental understanding. Like maybe we actually just get to put that down for a little minute mid-December as well and just enjoy and like see, what do we learn from that? What do we learn about our growth? Like we talked about this when Jupiter first moved into Gemini, of how can play and curiosity bring deep wisdom. I think it's so easy to assume that there's particular ways of acquiring wisdom, and that it's doing a course or doing the work in
Mm-mm.
capital T and W kind of things. But actually there's just as much self-development and growth and beauty to be found in just letting go and stripping naked and getting in the sprinkler with your kid. Like you'll find just as much wisdom in that moment, and you don't have to be doing the procession through the deep dark forest on this particular full moon, perhaps.
And maybe this is the time to really lean into that Capricorn area of your chart now and just to see what that's now with nothing in there for the first time in a long, long time and just go, oh, this void of space of just going, oh, so what is this as its pure format? Mm,
Mm. I love that. It's a really nice invitation as well.
mm.
And so what also happens the following morning at about 8 a.m. on the 16th of December is that Mercury will station direct at 6 degrees and 58 minutes. Is that
Yeah.
right? No, that mustn't be right. 6 degrees-ish. Maybe it was 5 degrees and 58 minutes.
Yeah, 6 degrees and 23 minutes.
Oh, I've just got something completely random and wrong. Good. Why not? And yeah, so that happens the following morning where Mercury will station and we'll get ready to move forward again.
That feels really nice. I like that. I feel like that waking up to that Mercury station direct is like Christmas. Maybe this feels like an early Christmas present of just like, oh, like for me personally, that feels like a relief. And having, Mercury went into the shadow zone. So last time it was here was 6th of November. So we've been journeying this for over a month now by this stage. And, this brings a new wisdom and new gifts and to be able to now start moving forward with the newfound presence that this Gemini full moon has left you in the following morning feels like such a blessing. I really love this very, very much. And then to watch it come into fruition over that sort of Christmas period and into, so we'll move out of its shadow zone on the 3rd of January at 22 degrees. So really close to where this full moon has landed. So this story, this gift giving of seeing what Mercury has done in the Sagittarius area of your chart, there's something here that has this full moon vibrating through until the first week of January as well, I feel.
Yeah, yeah, I agree. And I think that if you were going to astrologically elect a good day to have an early Christmas, this Sunday of the 15th of December would probably be a really nice moment for that, where the kids are going to be pretty happy with what's going on. And yeah, loving that Mercury is stationing, ready to move forward as the ruler of this full moon. And that makes sense to me too, of like it's not the time for like a breakthrough or rushing and getting
Right.
through something done. It's a stopping, it's a putting down of things to play and enjoy in that Gemini way. That really makes sense to me. I like that a lot.
Yeah, I like that. I like that a lot. And just being, just like feeling, oh, wow, that was big. And now I can just maybe just sit with that and just enjoy this moment of that Sagittarius areas of your chart and the
Yeah,
wisdom that's come from that.
yeah, for
A gift
sure.
that keeps giving, I think this is this full moon.
It's a really beautiful one.
Mm.
Um, what do we have next? So I have Sun square Neptune, but I'm actually feeling to skip that and go straight to summer solstice and to talk about that with the summer solstice chart. Is that okay with you?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Um, so this is the moment of summer solstice when the sun ingresses into Capricorn. But just before we roll into that, there is Sun square Neptune on the 19th of December at 1:28 a.m. Um, and it's worth noting because a couple of days later the sun is going to enter the nodal bendings, which is actually where it is here in the summer solstice chart. And so the nodal bendings are the square points that exist between the nodal axis. And so where Neptune is dreamy and transcendental and shifting and illusory, so too are the nodes strange and otherworldly and void-like and portal shifting and interdimensional. So it's kind of like out being, thrown into one dimension and spat out into another one before you really get to come home. But I think that, and it's an interesting entry point into Capricorn, given what we've been saying already, that this is the first time these planets are entering this space free of Pluto, no other outer planets, for 16 odd years, that it's quite surreal. Actually, there's quite a surreal procession moving into Capricorn and beginning the summer solstice this year.
Yeah, I'm just reflecting on, we spoke about the nodal bendings with the sun, I think back in July when the sun was in Cancer and had these nodal bendings at that point too, and how time
Oh,
can warp and how it's a bit strange and weird. And that really feels like, just thinking of summer solstice, which is the peak of the whole cycle from winter solstice. This is the midpoint that we get to see the full sun. It's the shortest night of the year. It's very linked to the fairy realm, and just like it's like we step into it and get a glimpse of time portals in the fairy realm for this moment. And especially with Neptune here playing it, and Venus has just come off a trine with Jupiter as well a couple of days beforehand. And yeah, it just feels like, ooh, like thing could, just get taken off by the fairies this night of this summer solstice. It feels such a lovely time to gather and to be with your community and to celebrate this peak, you know, festive moment of fairy realms of summer solstice, and have this moment to enjoy what fairy realm is like, and really also honoring the middle realm journey of the plant spirits. And that just feels like that dancing in the forest with the frogs and the birds and the fairies and sitting on mushrooms. Like, it could potentially be this way with, especially with, as I said, that um, Venus and Jupiter and Neptune so closely related here.
Very much so. It's definitely a very dimension shifting moment, and particularly at that peak sun moment, like for the sun to be entering a very warpy nodal space when it's full power, that's a real gateway
Yeah.
opening. What I would say as a caution here
Mm-mm.
is be really careful in indulging in alcohol or recreational drugs or like narcotics or even like just plants and herbal medicines. Just if that's something you're going to do anyway, go easy. Be really mindful of overindulgence, because I think in that very enticing, seductive, fairy way, you could probably be pulled into something you don't want to be in at this time, because the voids are chaotic neutral. They
Yeah.
don't give a shit about your good times. And neither does Neptune, quite frankly. Like, you want another world? I'll give you another world.
It just reminds me of the fairies, and that sort of vibe that fairies are humans are not friends. Fairies are not keen on humans, and actually getting to see that darker side of the fairy realm in, like, if you go too far into what actually is here, it's not all eating that mushrooms and frogs dancing. It's actually like fairies are fucking dark on us for doing what we do to the planet and their home. Like, you can easily get tripped up into that, especially with, as I said, that Saturn and Jupiter starting to really form that square. Like, it's just like, oh, that could be super tense if you go into, let yourself go too far
Yeah.
and get taken away. Like, it feels like that edge of, yeah, that real edge walking a little bit, especially at 0 degrees. And this is the last time that the sun is in the nodal bendings between Aries and Libra in this realm as well, because next time they meet, the sun and the nodes meet in this kind of way, the nodes they'll be moved. They'll be in Pisces and Virgo land. So this might be the last sort of maybe insight too of what this nodes had to offer in Aries and Libra areas of your chart as well.
Very much so. And so, like, if we think about the schematic of the eclipses and like the timeline of that,
Mm.
the eclipses are all about what happens when the sun meets the nodes. That is what defines an eclipse. It's when
Yes.
the sun moves into the vicinity of a node, and the moon either meets it or opposes it. And the other point in the cycle, which has a nodal story that unfolds, is in these bendings at these square points. So there is a continuation or a point of tension of that bigger eclipse story. And it's not quite as wild and obvious, but it's still very, very present. And so you might find whatever kind of themes these Aries Libra eclipses have been bringing up for you, you might find hints of them at this time as well. And yeah, I think particularly coming out of that square with Neptune, that will be very fertile for that strangeness to come through. And look, you absolutely can have the happy frog toadstool dream as well, but I'll be doing that by laying on the lawn with the daisies and watching the clouds rather than imbibing too much gin
Yeah.
that day. And yeah, just choosing, like, there's a certain amount of control you have by choosing how you interact with that. But
Mm-mm.
yeah, and it's quite a powerful. This is the sun at its most potent, and so
Mm.
what does a luminary have to say to the eclipse story, when typically eclipses are sort of like damaging or corrupting the luminaries because it's changing their regular program of like ticking along every day over the 365 days of the year like the sun does? The eclipses are a scheduled moment of chaos within those typical cycles. What does it mean for the sun to be at full potency and power when it enters a point of tension with that eclipse story. That's really fascinating to me. I'm really morbidly curious
You know,
about what pops up there right before Christmas too.
yeah, I feel like there's some, if you came to it with a real strong consciousness, like being very aware of the magic that you're weaving, you could really do some big stuff here
Mm.
between the timelines and yeah, yeah, it's really powerful. And what I'm also noticing just looking at it, I love that the fact that the moon is down here in Virgo, just sort of going, this is where, this is where that south node is moving to, like that axis. So it's really interesting, just interesting. I don't even know what that would look like, but it's just something there with the moon, just showing you where you're about to head.
I really like that too. And the moon, yeah, has just come out of a trine with the sun too. So is slowly starting to wane in its harvest phase.
Mm.
Um,
And it's
and
opposite Saturn too, just quietly or not so
it is
quietly.
too. Yes, again, like in terms of portals and thresholds being,
Square. Mm.
they are open. Like on the message, they are open at this time through a couple of different ways. And I think one of the best ways of working with moments like this is to ground, protect, and then gently surrender into what wants to arise, as opposed to attempting to direct it really strongly in a certain way. Because
Mm-mm.
the wielding peak sun, and then like a portal rips the rug out from underneath you, like that's a lot of energy to just kind of like drop on your head. And so yeah, it can be a good time to just show up and see what's there, and to be guardedly curious about that moment, and to again like let it lead you into fairy, but not to be dragged
That's right.
in into the
Especially
place.
because I can see with this Mercury now moving direct, this is actually a forming, like just for this moment, a forming mutable square, like like a grand cross actually. Just with this Sagittarius, Pisces,
Mm.
Gemini, and Virgo down here, mm, which is
Yeah,
where the nodes will be squaring for the next couple of years as well.
it's a big moment.
It's a big moment, yeah.
Isn't it? I'm really looking forward to it.
Yeah.
Truth be told.
What is this going to be?
Yeah, right before my birthday too. I'm here for it. Let's bake that into my solar return chart. Why not? Like what else am I going to do, right? Have a normal.
Exactly.
No. Who'd want that? Okay. My lavender flower essence is obviously wearing off and it's getting hot up here.
Okay.
So our next chart is for the second Jupiter square Saturn of this cycle. The first one that happened on the 20th of August, and with the third one to occur on the 16th of June, when Jupiter is in Cancer and Saturn is in Aries. But here we have that middle square of both Saturn and Jupiter right in the heart of Pisces and Gemini at 14 degrees, creating tension between the expansion and the contraction, the yes and the no, the warm and moist, the cool and dry. Like there's a tension point between these two slower moving planets, and it's on the 25th of December, so on Christmas Day, right on 9 a.m. AEDT.
What a setup. We go into this more detailed in our second episode of our Jupiter episode. Um, which is what really kicked off. This is the second of three, so this is sort of a midpoint that started back at on the 20th of August, actually, where Jupiter actually had the upper hand because it was going direct. Now it feels like Saturn has an upper hand here because it's moving forwards and Jupiter is retrograding. So this feels like there could be some sort of authoritarian sort of coming in over that expansive playfulness of Jupiter and in Gemini. Or maybe it could even be what I'm feeling is like that. So the thoughts inside your head that you thought that you could sort of move through, but that sort of detailed of Gemini and that Saturn is just going, no, you got to be very careful of what you say here, actually, because it could
Yeah,
stir up some shit right on Christmas Day.
for sure. And I think something else that we noticed with this when we were talking about it last night is that um, Mercury, oh, is that right? Oh, it's the trine there. I was looking at something else. So there
Mm.
is also a grand trine here
Mm.
with Jupiter and Venus, and both Black Moon Lilith and the moon itself. So the day before, so on the 24th, the moon would have completed that grand trine happening between Jupiter and Gemini, Venus in Aquarius, and the moon. And as the moon has moved on, Black Moon Lilith is there place holding that. And so typically the way I've been trained in Hellenistic astrology, if a big configuration like that doesn't have a planet on it, it's not, it doesn't have the potency because the planets are the focal points of matter that generate that configuration to happen. So Black Moon Lilith being not a body but a point in the sky, it doesn't quite hold the trine together. But because the moon is there, it still imports, and then the moon would have been conjunct Black Moon Lilith when that happened the day before. It does still import some of those Lilith themes at this time as well. And so it's interesting to think of, arguably the three most supportive, nourishing, benefic planets being Venus, Jupiter, and the moon, having this trine right before these two big players are also coming into perfection with this square is really interesting, and feeling Jupiter as holding quite a lot
Mm.
and being the focal point of a lot at that time. Um, One of the things we were talking about with this is that on the one hand, Jupiter and Saturn, they have such different priorities and such different visions for what's important in the world that it can create difficulties and challenges, but at the same time, they do both need each other to do their good work in the world. And like that just sounds like Christmas Day to me in some ways, doesn't it? Of coming together with all the different characters that, you may not see through the rest of the year, and you may or may not want to see through the rest of the year either, and of holding space for the differences and the opposing factors and those hard elements of tension, but also feeling this incredibly supportive and nutritive grand trine that's happening between the benefics and the moon at the same time.
Yeah.
But when it's importing Lilith, what we were saying last night was that if you're not accustomed to um, Lilith style, if you're not accustomed to being willing to push up against something that's not right, if you're not accustomed to fiercely holding your nose and your boundaries and you're calling out of things that is not appropriate or is not right, you could feel the grit in
Mm.
amongst the beauty of that. So even though it's a real beautiful, supportive trine, which I think will be the overwhelming feeling of that, there is the potential to just feel like a little bit of sand in your mouth with that as well. And like if you're not accustomed to dealing with that consciously, and you just get angry about it or you push back against it and you do the fire with fire, then that could really rear its head in a very different way, particularly because we've got that square with Saturn and Jupiter that are already bringing tension into that space.
Mm. I just had this image of everybody sitting around for Christmas dinner, and we're all, you're sitting there, and you all come from different backgrounds and, whatever, even though you had the same upbringing, but you're sort of sitting there, and then someone says something that's completely contrary to your beliefs. Like, so if you're, yeah, I'm just thinking of, yeah, I'm just thinking of my own family. I won't say anything, but just thinking, if you're quite passionate about a cause or something like that, that you feel really, strongly about, and someone says something that's against that cause or diminishes in any way, there's something here about Black Moon Lilith needing to hold her own and just like, is this the time and place to like fight back and to create tension? Like, because it could easily just like Black Moon Lilith could easily come through with a sickle and said, nah, and then Christmas dinner's over because someone's walked out. Like, to be very aware of that.
You know what else I'm hearing in that too, though,
Mm.
is to be mindful of where you assign where the tension was created.
Yes,
It's not always on the person calling it out. The person calling it out has felt the palpable
that's
tension
right.
that everyone else has also
Yes.
felt and is not willing to proceed not having named it. And even though, like you said, there could be a fallout from that, and it's not always the answer to call it, but I think it's the honesty of feeling that in your body and being like, no, you know what, this time that's not okay. And I have a perfect anecdote for this. It wasn't Christmas, it was many years ago. I was vegan at the time, and I had been for a number of years. And I think it was quite early in me doing that. And my one of my grandfathers, we were all out for dinner, like at a restaurant, and he pulled out his phone and started showing me pictures of slaughterhouses from different places in the world who don't have good standards, showing me these gruesome photos. And like it was just so surreal to me that he thought that was a good idea. And I don't even remember how I responded to that. But, and that feels like the tension of like the two different ideals and something just being so in your face. If I would have been a little older, I would have called that, and not like nastily, but I would have called it. Whereas at the time, I'm almost certain that I didn't. But it's stuff like that that comes up where like actually having a boundary and having
Mm.
a feeling about that is loving to everyone, because then they know where you stand, whether they like it or not. And that is to me such a Lilith holding,
Yeah.
is that ferocity, or that hard line of no, I will not, or no, that is not okay. Is actually has an outcome of better relationships. And like, what better time to practice and whip that one out than Christmas Day, right?
At least you probably won't see anybody else for the next year until next Christmas. So,
Beauty. I would
yeah.
be up for a quiet Christmas.
And the landscape will have changed by then. So, maybe it'll be different. Yes.
Hmm.
So, yes, Christmas Day, just be wary.
It's a good one.
Hmm.
Uh, so our last chart for this episode is for the 28th of December, where we have Venus square Uranus. And it's worth noting that between Christmas and this day, the 28th of December at 6:41 p.m., that we do also have the final Mercury-Jupiter opposition happening on the 27th. In the morning, and later in the evening of the 27th, we have Mercury square Saturn too. So that could be a moment where things that were not said on Christmas Day are suddenly said a couple of days later, when someone has had a moment to ruminate about those pictures that were not appropriately shared. So yes, there could be an interesting continuation of a theme in those days rolling out after Christmas.
Yeah, it's interesting because it feels like you've had Christmas and something was said and everybody's gone back home and sat with it for a while, and then something's come back, but it's now changed. Like there's something that with Uranus there that it's changed something, or someone's thought, or someone's really thought about it and said, well, yeah, I hear you, maybe, or someone's actually gone, well, no. And I'm not going to talk to you again. And that maybe that's the change, like just be ready for the unexpected with Venus there, matters of the heart too, um, in this way. But, Venus is, as we said, had her underworld journey with Pluto and still in this co-presence with Pluto as well. So there's still an influence there with the underworld element. But this tension with the portals of change of Uranus, but yeah, it's just really interesting. But whatever's happening here, because Uranus is still in retrograde, it will probably come back for a review anyway. So, maybe that's when you kiss and make out when Uranus goes direct or something like that. But yeah, there's an interesting tension here of change making, and feels like of the feminine. It doesn't feel like matters of the heart.
Definitely. This could, with Venus and Uranus, it's Venus and it's the beauty and the love and the relating, and then Uranus being the unexpected,
Mm.
or something that goes against the status quo or against the norm. This could also be like someone slyly texting you a few days later and being like, I'm so fucking glad you finally said something to her. Or just like feeling that solidarity of like, I thought I was all alone in this thing, but actually, surprisingly, Uranus, I've been backed and loved. Venus, like, so that could look a couple of different ways. And ultimately, again, it's that thing of it's neither good nor bad, it's unexpected things
Either
happening
way.
in the realm of relating. And yeah, with those other things coming in with Saturn and Jupiter, with Mercury, it's like the communication just kind of
Mm.
flicking around and checking on everyone and then coming back with an outcome a few days later is really interesting.
Mm. And it's also in the dark moon too. So, where hasn't been dealt with appropriately or in a way that's been, this isn't, this could be the banshee might come up at this point because everything is culminating that whatever happened back at the new moon in Sagittarius, if it hasn't been worked through or, it's been building, if you haven't, done some work around it, this is where it could just sort of explode out as well with this square. So this is a really, it just feels like unpredictable energy, of course, with Uranus here, but even more so because it is a dark moon. There is, it feels like there could be a recipe for conflict in this because things are being pent up and all of a sudden it snaps and it's like, oh, dark moon, blah, purge of, and with Mercury there too, something of words as well, like being that co-presence as the moon moves over Mercury, in the next couple of days of this transit. So yeah, that's really just, I think, yeah, maybe just sit in like the post-Christmas slumber a little bit longer. Stay on the couch and watch the cricket or something under the aircon. I don't know. Or maybe the home is the place where that could happen. Who knows?
And look, I think too, Mars is also trining the moon at that time too. And just again, like just the virtue of Mars being retrograde and still moving quite slowly,
Mm,
that is enough to fuel conflict on its own. You don't need the Venus square Uranus. You don't need Mars to be opposite Pluto. You don't need a dark moon. And yet, here we are with the skies conspiring to pop that all in together. And you know what this makes me think of as well? This makes me think of, for me, my experience of these like big prescribed family moments of the year when there's such an incongruence with what's happening in the world that I wonder if that's part of the tension that's felt there too, because you come together and you want to be in joy and you want to love each other and you want to celebrate. And like we know that to change the world, we have to stay connected to our love, like to fall into despair. While we need to grieve, falling into despair, it doesn't serve if we stay there too long. But at the same time, I have found it very difficult to really drop into joy when I know what else is happening in the world.
mm,
And I think that that can put a level of tension in everybody because everybody feels it regardless of whether there are different sides of a fence to be on and sitting on them or whatever.
mm,
That it just brings a certain level of tension from the collective. And it's our responsibility to just hold that as best we can and to speak out when we feel called to do so and to lean back into our hearts and to let something pass through easily when we know it's not worth it when we feel called to do so.
Yeah, it feels like a moment that, has the potential that you're just feeling all that, and all of a sudden there's an outburst of tears to allow that energy to move and shift because it's been built up over time and not, as I said, with that dark moon as well. Like there's something about here about expressing with that Mercury there, whether it be through sacred tears or, words or just, um, but that
Yeah.
moment of needing to release something that's been holding, that you've been holding, that, yeah, that tension that's here, that's been built up, especially with that square of Saturn and Jupiter. And off the back, look, you got, and also look, you've got building here is what will come in early January is the Mars opposition to Pluto, which is explosive. So, feeling the tension building from that as well. Like, we've spoke about this a few times over the past 6 months of Pluto and Mars relationship and how there's always sort of relationship with an explosive of conflicts and in the outer world, in the inner world as well. So there's something here I think that relates to this that carries on until January. um yeah, that's really interesting, I think. Not long after this square two, you got Chiron stationing direct at 19 degrees. It's been in retrograde since the 27th or 26th of July. So I think it was at 23 degrees or thereabouts, which would have been, yeah, that's really that thing about Chiron too, and looking at the woundings, the sacred woundings, and seeing it as a learning opportunity to heal. There's something here too with that now that we can move forward, but to be able to do that, we need to actually see what is here and to move it through to be able to heal it in the first place. So there's something definitely around expressing grief or expressing the things that have been pushed down and pent down for the healing to begin. Mm,
Yeah, and considering Mars is ruling that Chiron at the moment
that's
too.
right.
And like Mars moon aspects can absolutely be big emotional outbursts. And while it might not be pleasant to feel or to witness, like underneath it is usually a grief of some kind, anger doesn't come from nowhere. Anger is a response to a hurt, it's a response to suffering. And I think Chiron stationing can feel like a moment of really sitting in that. Like, even though it's getting ready to go direct and to move forward, it's not happened yet. This is the moment of feeling the consolidation of that. And I know that Austin Coppock, one of my teachers, talks about those retrograde moments as a moment in which a planet gets on a soapbox and has something to say. Sorry, that the station moments, not the
Yeah.
retrograde moments, but the moments that a planet stations either direct or forward. It's a moment that a spotlight gets thrown down and they step out on the stage, and on that moment they have something to say and they get the full attention.
And
And
this
so
is
that's Chiron's job at that moment.
That's right. And as this moon starts to really go into the dark phase, right before, in the dark moon of this cycle, it's going to try and Chiron in this fire trine here, which
Mm.
makes maybe that expression of that emotional sort of hurt and pain to be released, that's been built up since that square after solstice. It feels like we have this beautiful little window in between in December up until solstice, but from then on it starts to get a bit rough and tumble, and things can sort of be stretched and moved and and but it's all leading up to this dark moon of like we can't hold it in any longer because it's just so much pressure with the squares that needs to, when this moon passes with that trine to Chiron that's now stationed direct and leading to the Capricorn new moon, which is the first new moon with no, um, in Capricorn, it can just go and out it comes like well, with fire, it could be rage, like I'm this movement. But how do you best navigate that where healing can come as yeah, as not to harm? I think that's going to be really important with all this fire energy and the tensions and the air.
I think it's such a potent thing to see the narrative of it begins with the
Mm.
moon entering that dark phase in this big trine with Mars. So we begin with the flare, we begin
Mm.
with the pain and the outburst. Then it comes into Mercury where we start to understand and be able to communicate that. And then we come into the aspect with Chiron where we really put the pieces together of where that actually came from.
Mm.
And then she gets to go into the new moon and meet the sun and have that transformative moment of rebirth and begin the next moon cycle. So really from the 28th of December, basically till New Year's, there is a bit of an alchemical process of something revealing itself, perhaps with a bit of a bang, and just slowly being able to unfold and make sense of, and then apply some healing to that. But the healing comes through, like you said, the purging and the letting go and the admitting where that outburst come from, and deciding what to do from there.
Yeah, absolutely. And then from here, like this is feels like the wrapping up of that Taurus. I mean, this Aries and Libra nodal axes as well, because in January they shift into Pisces and Virgo. So it feels like, the completion as well on that story.
Very much so.
Mm.
Big ending for the end.
Big ending. It feels like a cliffhanger to see what happens next, because coming up in January, like straight after, like I think it's like the 1st or 2nd of January, we have that Mars and Pluto opposition. We have Venus moving into Pisces. We have Mars retrograde back, regressing back into Cancer. Mercury moves into Capricorn, sort of fueling that, adding to that Capricorn sort of what is this now story. Full moon in Capricorn, Sun ingresses into Aquarius. So Aquarius then meets up with Pluto for the first time. We get to see what that looks like, and the nodal shifts, and Uranus station direct at the end of January. So it feels like we've left January and December on a bit of a cliffhanger to see what's about to unfold next, because it's that coming up and bringing things up to be able to move it, and what does it look like moving in with this it's very changing landscape, I think.
Yeah,
Mm,
I'm already, yeah, happily curious to see what some of those things bring next. Because yeah, it feels like so many of these big stories are really starting to show us what they're all about, and from there, it's easier to discern and easier to decide
mm,
that, and I'm looking forward to that. And what a beautiful thing to be held by this season as Venus enters Pisces too. Like that feels like such a sweet gift amongst all of the change and the apprehension of what comes next, to feel the expansive beauty and joy of Venus in Pisces. I think is going to be a really important, like of literally going having a swim in the ocean,
yeah,
to
yeah,
let
and
the
I
soul
think
do
that
things.
that will be a good balm in the lead in to hold that, because when Venus does move through Pisces and hits Saturn and Neptune and the nodes, and then it's going to go into Aries, and then it's going to retrograde back like it becomes quite I'm just thinking time will be, it will be just strange, I think, the beginning of next year. And yeah, actually, we should mention our 6 month look at what we're doing. So, coming up, we haven't set a date for it yet, but coming up very soon, we're going to be running an event that's going to go through the major transits from January right through June. It's going to be a very transformative 6 months. We'll put the details up for that soon, but watch out for that one. I think that's going to be really amazing to sit through and to work through, just to see what's coming up, because it is going to be a really, really big year with some major, major outer planet transits. And we've been talking about this the whole time, but realizing it today as we're going through the dates, like we're actually in it now. It's happening now. It's like it's now, it's here. Yeah.
And that half yearly episode will give us an opportunity to really throw some of our focus at those bigger outer planets, without some of the more mundane movements month to month. So we'll be able to really focus on some of those much bigger monumental shifts and dive a little deeper into those.
Yeah, that sort of really collective movements, revolutionary times, I feel.
Yeah, to say the least, right?
Okay, so what's coming up for you? What do you got going on?
So, I'm not back at practice yet, but I am just gently anticipating reopening my clinic space for naturopathic astrological tarot readings and things in late January, early February. If you're someone who has been like really hanging out, or we had to reschedule something back in, geez, like May or something when this grand hiatus began, get back in touch with me so I can pop you at the top of my list. But I am doing lots of things with my medicine making at the moment, which is feeling really good and has been a really nice way for me to keep like being in my work, but in a more chill and relaxed kind of way. So I'm going to be at Tanglewood, which is a New Year's Eve festival this year from the 30th of December to the 2nd of January. I'm so excited. It's my family's festival, and my sweet cousin who passed away in the middle of the year, this was her baby and her legacy. So her and her brother, my other cousin Lee, built this festival from the ground up. And I'm really excited to be going this year now that my girl is old enough to do so. I'm going to have a market stall there as well with all of my products. So if you are going, please come and say hello to me. I'd love to meet you. I'm also doing an Akuna Park night market tomorrow, which is the 6th of December, 4:30 till 9 in Berwick. And I'm going to be at the Good Food Emporium in Narre Warren on the 21st of December from 11:30 to 1:30 with my products, just to be able to chat and have a play with some of those. I am taking expressions of interest for term 1 for my circles kicking back off again. So if you have been in them before or would like to join them, I'm not sure the format yet, but there'll be astrology and tarot and all those good things. And I'm looking at also setting up a practitioner mentoring circle, mostly for the intersection of herbalism and astrology. So if that is something that excites you, please let me know, because I'll create that based on there being interest. So message me. And the last thing to keep an eye on is that I've got a bunch of new essences that I finally created the labels for. They're so freaking beautiful. I love them so much.
Powerful, can I just say? Powerful.
Oh, they're wonderful.
Mm.
There's 7 flowers and a stone. My first stone essence, which I'm going to slowly upload onto my online apothecary at rebeccaholly.com.au/shop. At the moment, the lavender skies, lavender essence, and the solar panacea chamomile essence is up there, as well as the last of my stock of a couple of herbal infused vinegars. I've got mugwort dream pillows. I've been really like busily squirreling and making things. So please go have a look there, and the new ones will be up very soon as well. So that is everything, I believe.
Awesome. And starting late January, we're starting a next intake of Invoking a Nana journey through the underworld. This is a deep 6-month journey into making friends with your own inner darkness and sitting and releasing what no longer serves, and sitting in the void with a beautiful group of, I would say, sisters, but we also welcome men. We are journeying with Dragonfly this next journey, which is friggin' epic. The movement between serpent and dragon and turning into this transformational dragonfly. So that's happening. So intake is on now. If you're interested in that, let me know. That's online with 2 face-to-face gatherings here in Central Victoria. I'm doing intake for Temple of New Week Patreon, which is an astrological study group. I'm also doing one-on-one readings and holistic space holding and counseling as well, one-on-one. There's probably a drum making coming up, and there also is a new podcast starting. It's so exciting, with Natasha Colchester and myself, about these. We're opening up a school, actually, to be honest, and it's called the School of Healing and Magical Arts, where we just jump on and we talk about all sorts of things, from astrology to numerology to crystals to tarot to magic to, all the things that are bubbling up for us. Like, it's going to be a really awesome podcast. So watch out for that one as well. We're also doing mentorship too in the healing and magical arts. If you're interested in deepening your practice, you can find me at probably Instagram. It's probably the best place to find me, which is Yvonne Waldhart. You could go to my website. It's pretty hodgepodge, but you get a bit of an idea, which is yvonnewaldhart.com. Or you can just email me and message me through both of those streams and contact me directly. So that is what is happening. But yes, I'm also with the one-on-one readings, astro readings. I'm doing like a special offer for December and January, which is a 6-month reading going through the major transits and how that affects your chart as well. And that, yeah, that can come with a report. Yeah, if you're willing to go there and have that all in one little package.
It
That's it.
sounds beautiful. And so, if you love our work, please share it. Please visit us on Patreon. You can become a subscriber for free to follow our work, but you can also subscribe as a paying patron, which supports us in this labor of love. It helps us not have to pay for our own equipment and things to be doing this job. It helps us look after subscriptions to be uploading and delivering the podcast and things like that. And it also just helps two mamas trying to find that balance between mothering and bringing what they love to the world. It helps us find that with greater ease. And thank you so much to the sweet patrons who are already doing that. It like every time I open Patreon and I see that, I just feel so, I don't use this word often, but I feel so very blessed and so grateful. And it's really, really important to help us be able to meet this in a nourished, not quite so stretched way.
Without this, I don't think either of us could do it. Like, one thing that we've learned in both in a Mercury retrograde that we can't compromise the children and our own health and anything. And so by having the support to be able to pay for, yeah, like to upload subscriptions and to pay for things to bring this to you is like it helps immensely.
Yeah, and it is essentially unpaid work. Like
Mm.
it's not something we're being paid a wage for. It just
Labor
helps
of love.
the costs to be
Mm.
able to deliver it, that cost doesn't come from our pocket is a thing of it's a gift, and that's a beautiful thing. And we also offer extra things to our subscribed community that we don't offer to everybody else. One of those things is Yvonne's epic transit workbooks, which she offers every month so that you can follow the transits that we've talked about in relationship to your own chart, which is really bringing in that embodied experience. They're just, yeah, they're epic. They're wonderful. And then my monthly offering was a monthly election, but I'm tweaking that a little bit so that it's just a different offering every month. Sometimes it will be the deep dive into a plant and like recipes or instructions to work with that plant more deeply. Sometimes it will be an electional chart. Sometimes it'll be the way that we talked about the Mercury Kazemi, where I just offer an invitation to lean into something more deeply, or a guided meditation. I don't know what it's going to look like, but that's part of the beauty of it, is to have some flexibility in what I offer so that it can be more relevant and more alive based on the skies at the present time.
Absolutely. And I feel like that deep listening to and respond to what we're hearing the call to do, I think that's really important, especially for this stallion twins that we're us two are.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you so much for listening.
You can find us on
Of course.
YouTube. This was part of my Mercury retrograde experience. I also just updated everything so that you can now find us on Spotify and Apple Podcasts as well. So there's a couple of episodes missing that I'm going to get up in this next couple of days. But as of the release of this episode, you'll be able to access everything on YouTube, but also on Spotify and Apple Podcasts, and therefore whatever podcast app, blah, 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 you use typically, which is wonderful.
Go well this December. Happy solstice. May the festive season be gentle and nourishing for you all. And we are deeply grateful that you've tuned in and made it this far with all our love. Thank you. Thank you for listening. Take
Much
care out
love.
there.
See you soon.
Bye.
Thank you for listening to The Sentient Sky. Follow us on Patreon at www.patreon.com/thesentientsky for episode updates, our contact info, events and offerings, and to connect with us and our co-created community. Thank you so much to each and every patron for their support and presence within that community.
Deep gratitude to our ancestors, guides, and to the green world of the earth and the cosmic sky. May we ever be acting in service to the highest good of all beings. We pay our deepest respect to the First Nations people and to the elders past, present and emerging, to the Wurrung and the Jurjur Wurrung country people. We give great thanks to the continuing connection to the land, sky, sea and their communities. We also like to express our deepest of gratitudes to our own ancestors and to the land, sea and sky of their origins. Both of us would like to thank our teachers, families, friends and communities that support us and inspire us in this cosmic work. Especially big love to our beautiful children for whom this is ultimately for.
Great thanks to my brother, Daniel Van Horsen, for allowing us to use his original music, whom you can find on Facebook for details on his offerings as a session musician and sound engineer. Until next time, see you soon. Bye.
Thank you. Much love. Bye.